Title: Fruit Bat. Everyone has a favorite ice cream flavor, Demi. Not everyone, clearly. Demetrius snipped back playfully. Ian laughed, the sound spilling out into the sky and Demetrius's heart in one clear note. Ian had asked what his favorite flavor was with his hands behind his back, not really managing to conceal the slightly dripping cones of ice cream behind it. Any closer, and he'd have gotten some on his jacket. He'd asked Ian to guess. Strawberry was the eager shout, and he didn't have the heart to disagree. Though he'd be lying if strawberry wasn't seeming more and more appealing after Ian had said it. They were having this discussion after he'd finally revealed the truth. He didn't have much of an opinion on ice cream. He didn't have much of an opinion on anything, really. He'd been noticing that lately. It wasn't Robin's fault either. Something. He didn't know what. Just didn't click with him anymore. And it did with Ian. He wasn't much scared of things. He reasoned, he thought, he considered. There wasn't much of that allowed when he had a crush on someone he, coincidentally, wasn't married to. And he was taking that person to the cave instead of his wife, who was tired of hearing how the fruit bats worked. And strawberry ice cream was dripping down his wrist onto the sizzling tarmac, and everything felt too right. It was nice to have a friend. Tell me about fruit bats, Ian said. They belong to the megabat family, he smiled. It's thought that they originated in Australasia, as you might have guessed. They eat fruit. Ian snorted at this and said something that sounded like I better watch out, then under his breath. That sentence didn't make sense. Demetrius dismissed it. One thing about them is they can't One thing about them is they can't echolocate, he said, waiting for Ian to catch up. The cave was on a small hill, and despite it being fall, it was pretty darn warm. Oh, that's so sad, Ian frowned. That's like the coolest thing about being a bat. Demetrius smiled. Well, they're still easily the cutest, so. I could be a fruit bat then, Ian said, climbing onto an outcrop. Cute privilege must really be something if it can overpower no echolocation. And you say you know nothing about video games, said Demetrius. And I agree, on both counts. Ian smiled, hopping down so he was nearly eye level with Demetrius. He was a shorty. All of his hair falling into his eyes. I can't see anymore, but thanks, Demi. Demetrius chuckled fondly. He smoothed Ian's hair out, suddenly freezing when he realized what he was doing. Apparently, Ian had had the same thought. Extremely red-faced, he hesitantly raised a hand to Demetrius's, which was still in his hair. Ian's long fingers grazing Demetrius's brown ones. And they stayed like that for about 10 seconds before breaking away. Demetrius speed-walking along. Ian was, too, but he was sort of struggling to keep up. Demetrius didn't stop this time, however. He had a list of things he wasn't saying out loud right then. 1. This had amazingly similar energy to when he'd stand outside under heavy clouds, waiting for the storm to break. Somewhat registering Robin calling for him to come in. He'd catch a cold. He could nearly smell the air and see the color of the sky. Nearly. 2. Demi. He preferred it to Robin's Dem. Demi. 3. He might not remember his name. When they reached the cool, wet mouth of the cave, Ian panting, Demetrius turned around for the first time since their little moment and spread his arms like a baron showing off an estate. Behold, the cave. Come on in, fruit bat. Inspiring, he thought to himself, setting down his backpack. He was incredible at words. Ian took a timid step forward, glancing up at the smooth rock walls and the babbling stream. Demetrius paused for a second, sneaking a glance at Ian, who was probably listening for the distant roar of the waterfall. Demetrius listened too, closing his eyes, stepping further back into the cave. And there was silence, and there was noise. All the water and setting suns and moving clouds of the world moving in, and every pot and pan clanging, and every seed pushing its head out of the dark soil into the world. And amid all this, Ian's quiet breathing, quieter and louder than all else. Splash. Demi, cried Ian, rushing toward a surprised as fuck Demetrius, who was treading water in the stream now. He held out a hand to him. Demetrius took his hand, and several things happened at once. The late sunlight glinted around Ian's face, and he was suddenly unbearably pretty. He took Ian's hand, and Ian let out a squeal. Demetrius was confused about that last bit for a second, until he realized he had pulled Ian into the water as well. However, as is established before, Ian was not as tall as Demetrius, and had significantly more difficulty floating easily. So he'd done something that would have made Demetrius go a tiny bit dead if he hadn't already been in so much shock. "What'd you do that for, idiot?" Ian squealed, swatting Demetrius with one of his sopping wet sleeves, the other still clinging tightly to Demetrius's shoulders. "Water tastes like moss," he said in return, inspiring. "You would know what that tastes like," Ian said reproachfully, staring up at Demetrius through long eyelashes. "This has been fun, but I'm cold." And then he stopped. Because without thinking, he seemed to be doing a lot of that lately. Demi had put his arms around his waist. Is that fine?" Demi asked timidly, half ready to run away. "Yeah," said Ian. "Yeah." Surprising both Ian and himself, he cupped one hand around Ian's cheek. "Is this?" Quietly, "Yes." Standing in silence, freezing, Demi blurted out the question before he lost both courage and circulation in his legs. "May I?" Ian nodded frantically, like a child being asked if he wanted a hug, like a tree's branches being touched by some lonely wind, like he was being asked if he could be kissed. The storm broke, and Demi was kissing Ian, and Robin's voice was nowhere to be found, nowhere to be heard, not a whisper on a lonely wind. And he was Demi and not Dem, and he was kissing a boy in the fruit bat cave. And it was magnificent. Ian's hands scrabbling in Demi's hair, quite forgetting that he could very well drown, not really, without Demi. Ian's face warmer than a fire, as if they weren't in a cold fucking stream, a million things. They broke apart, and Ian peppered his face with tiny pecks, and Demi became warm himself. Clean like laundry in hot, bright sunshine, hearths torches and lamps in the sun. That was cool. Shut up, you dork. I'm not cold, but I really would like to not be chest deep in a stream anymore. All right, fruit bat. The end. This was written by Fine Line, also known as Psyduck Apologist in our Discord. How was that?